Let's start the board meeting, if we might, and thank you everybody for joining the public board meeting of NHS England. Can I just make a request of colleagues that the first time each of you speaks for the purpose of the webcast, would you remember to introduce yourselves? So Richard Meading's chair, NHS England. Apologies for absence. We have some apologies for absence. A number of the colleagues who were with us this morning in the private board unfortunately can't be with us this afternoon, but we've got apologies from Suresh Viswanathan, Simon Wesley, Mark Bailey, Mark Walport, Chris Hobson and Tanuj Kapilashram. Any declarations of interest, new declarations of interest that board members need to share? Okay, thank you. And can we approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of October? Can we sign those? Yeah. Thank you very much. Let me just share some activities that I've been undertaking, but also some other reflections attaching to this board meeting. I think what I should just say to start with, if you'll forgive the egotistical nature of the comment, is since we last met, as you all know, I am now due to step down at the end of March, and I'd just like to make some personal comments around that. To say it has been an honour, actually, to act as chair of this organisation is an understatement. And before starting this role, I was aware certainly of the unique place that the NHS has in the nation's heart, and I was also aware that it also faced a unique set of challenges, and I've seen and learned so much in the past couple of years. And perhaps, if you'll forgive me being oversimplistic, perhaps these are sort of three key reflections. And the first, actually, and it's to quote, and you've heard me say it a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, actually, and I apologise for the quote, but it's the quote from the Gladiator first film, not this Gladiator second film, which is to the effect that the NHS deals with whatever comes through those gates. And there is no off switch. We don't get to choose our markets. The NHS treats everyone to the best of its ability. And actually that is no mean feat, given the record levels of demand from a growing and ageing population. And plus also the structure where the NHS operates against a self-created organisational boundary with social care, which itself is also significantly underinvested and facing rising acute pressures. It's a real challenge. The second reflection, and as our former board colleague Lord Darcy made clear in his review, we're dealing with growing demand, and that's in spite of chronic capital underinvestment, which is constraining capacity. So we have a third the hospital beds of Germany and half those of a number of other European countries scaled to population size. And so while the NHS is today providing absolute record levels of healthcare, more than we have ever provided before, which is actually just a testament to the sheer commitment of our workforce, our frontline workforce and our broader workforce. My third observation is that unless we invest but also continue to reform, more alone will never be enough. And then that said, what gives me optimism actually for the NHS is the sheer scale of innovation and commitment that I've witnessed across the NHS in my time here. So sometimes a bit simplistically, and I could say heuristic judgment, but that's a bit pompous, but somewhat simplistically, twin tracks. The twin tracks are to continue to innovate and at the same time to invest in fixing the basics. And if I think about the innovation, and I'm often asked about innovation, the role of innovation is remarkable, from ambient documentation to save clinicians time, the NHS app, the FDP, EPR, the rollout of new medicines, new treatments, robotics, nanorobotics, medtech, cancer vaccinations this year, liquid biopsies. You hear this array of innovation, and actually it is something that acts for me as a foundation of optimism. So I just wanted to say that by way of intro, because since the last board we've announced that I'm going to be stepping down, as I say, at the end of March. Couple of things, if I might, by way of housekeeping. Again, we talked about them this morning. The advert for my replacement has not yet gone out. We think it's going to be imminent, I think, which will be good. And that should hopefully give enough time, for my successor to come into role in good time. I would share, though, that, and I know the Secretary of State is keen to see this, but again, we need to get this process going. Not us, sorry, the public sector appointments process needs to get going, because we need to find 3 or 4 new non-executive directors. The board knows, of course, that Sir David Behan and Dame Helen Stokes-Lampard left the board a couple of months or so ago, and it's not only me who's stepping down at the end of March, but clearly both the deputy chairs, Sir Wal Collada and Andrew Morris, are also stepping down. So we are in need of getting that NED recruitment underway, so that by the end of March the board has sufficient continuously high quality non-executives, not just to do the work of the board, but to do the work of the board committees. And if I just then move from that to the board committees, that we won't go through them in detail now, we did that this morning, but actually the board committees carry a huge burden in terms of more detailed engagement on issues as a matter of good governance, good appropriate corporate governance. So whether it's a Digital Data and Technology Committee, which actually was the replacement committee essentially for the NHS Digital Board to make sure we had continuity of agenda, or whether it's the Workforce Training and Education Committee, which actually was the same substitute committee for the Health Education England Board to make sure we had continuity. And then clearly we have the normal board committees of Audit and Risk and Quality Committee and People and Remuneration, and then NOMS Committee. So there's a significant amount of work that's required. And we went through that this morning in terms of the work that those committees have done since the last board. But I list them, and that wasn't necessarily all of them, because I think it reveals and shows actually why it's really important that we do bring into the board the replacement directors for those of us who are stepping down. Let me talk a little bit more about the work of the board. Now, as a board, we've discussed the 10-year health plan, which we've done sort of 3 formal occasions so far, including actually last night, so yesterday evening. We had a very good discussion with not just Sally Warren, but a number of the core groups, be they the vision groups or the enabling groups. So we had a number of co-chairs, some of whom are actually in this room clearly, because a number of our NHS England executive colleagues are co-chairs of some of those groups, but also some externals. And I think that was really, really helpful. I know some of you here have attended the public deliberations and the staff deliberations. So I attended the London regional staff engagement on the 10-year plan, and on Sunday, this coming Sunday, I'm going to attend the London deliberative event this weekend with Minister Gwynne. And actually, I'm quite excited to hear what we'll be focusing on. I know, Steve, you've attended them, Sarah Jane, you've attended them, Amanda, you've attended them, and others have also, Vin, Emily, have all attended these events, and I think they're going to be really informative for us. So there's the 10-year health plan that's been launched and is well underway. And of course, since we last met, the Chancellor set out the government's spending plans in the autumn budget. I would just say that, and I'm sure you join with me, that we welcome the prioritisation of the NHS, and particularly around capital investment. It was very helpful and very supportive of the government to give us the additional capital investment. There have clearly been reports of underinvestment over many years, and we do need to start investing to catch up with that. But suffice it to say, finances remain more than very challenging, and we will need to retain our focus on maximising return for every penny of taxpayer investment. And we continue, and Amanda and Julian and Emily, as we know, and other colleagues, Steve, Duncan and others, Sarah Jane, are working very closely with government currently now, real time effectively, not this afternoon, but otherwise pretty much consistently, to finalise the financial position, not just for this year, where I think we've got good sight, and Julian will update us later on, but also setting the numbers, essentially the financial envelope for 25, 26. And as I say, Julian will set out further details shortly. I should just reference that Amanda and Julian also both appeared in front of the Public Accounts Committee last week, where they set out our progress in driving further productivity improvement and reform. And again, we'll be discussing those items later on in the board today. If you'll then just allow me to continue for a couple of minutes longer and share just some of the meetings and other engagements that I've had, again, since the last board. The joint all-staff briefing with the Secretary of State and Amanda for DHSC staff and NHS England staff. Amanda, you and I had our normal quarterly catch-up with the National Audit Office. Very good board deep dives. So, as colleagues know, we do deep dives outside the regular board calendar, and we had a very good deep dive into the new operating model. I've done the quarterly ICB chairs call, where all 42 chairs in 3 groups, so 3 14s, come together, and we have a day essentially of communication and sharing views. NHS England's Genomics Medicine Services strategy session, again a very good conversation, predominantly focusing on, with Ming Tang, focusing on data and architecture and technology underpinning genomics medicine service. And I also attend on behalf of the NHS England board, the Genomics England Limited board, and we had a meeting actually on Monday of this week. And then in stakeholder engagement, I've met with Nuffield Health, I've met with NHS Confed, NHS providers, the King's Fund, a number of DHSC colleagues, the National Wellbeing Service. Yesterday I attended the NHS Assembly. Amanda, you also came and did the closing remarks and shared State of the Nation with the very good NHS Assembly. As I say, 10-year plan we've engaged on. Other engagements, just to mention by way of speaking. So I was a guest speaker, very helpfully, I hope, at the Chelsea Westminster Donors Dinner, and that was really, really good. I was a key speaker at the Nexus Media Group Healthcare Summit. I spoke at the London Regional Systems Leaders event on the 10-year health plan. I was a guest speaker at the Longevity Forum. I've done a couple of podcasts, and actually last week with Julian and the Secretary of State and our leaders in the new hospitals programme, we hosted a dinner for industry, which actually was a really good engagement, and where I think there was some very, I was going to say pun, concrete comments made by industry, actually contributing to the structure of the new hospital programme. And just by way of visits, I've only done 2 substantive visits. One was up to York, where I visited a mental health 24/7 centres, and also went down to Cornwall to visit the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly ICB. And it was good not to see the ICB, but we had an afternoon engaging with a number of voluntary sector organisations who provide huge community support actually into the provision of health to the citizens of Cornwall. So that's my opening set of chairman's remarks, and I'm happy to take any comments or questions if people have any, and if not, I can move on to Amanda, Chief Exec's update.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Richard. And look, I don't want to embarrass you, but I think on behalf of the executive, I certainly would just like to take this opportunity to thank you, Richard.
There are 2 more boards, Amanda.
I know that. This is very brief. The next ones will be much more fulsome, but I think it's just worth saying, I mean, you really have been a staunch advocate for frontline staff, and also for everything the NHS has delivered in the face of such huge pressure and increasing demand under your tenure. And you have been also just passionate about the things that need to be different to allow the NHS to be fit for the future. And I know you're not planning to take any break in that pace and the encouragement of us all as we look towards the 10-year plan and other opportunities. We'll really miss you. And I'm
We'll see
very
how the
glad
next two boards do.
that you're with us till the end of March, so
Yeah.
we'll have plenty of opportunity to reflect between now and then. I would also just sort of by way of other news on our own structure and senior team, just like to welcome Louise Shepherd, who has now officially started as the Regional Director for the North West. So great to have her now on board within the team. A few things I thought it might be worth covering really picks up from some of what Richard has already said. So obviously since we've last met we had the budget in October, and I think we would all appreciate, and certainly I know I've said this publicly, the very tough choices the government has made to prioritise funding for the NHS, and in particular we welcome the boost to capital investment, much needed, as you said a moment ago, Richard, due to the rising backlog maintenance bill, but will also help us continue to invest in things that improve productivity. So things like upgrading scanners, other tech, which we know will be absolutely crucial in not just now, but the longer term as well. We'll discuss this further in the finance update, but we are still working through some of the details of that with government, and there will be a first opportunity to have discussions with ICB leaders on the shape of 25-26 next week. What we do know, though, for certain, is that the financial position for next year will be tight and will require very frank and honest conversations as part of the planning process. There will undoubtedly be tough decisions ahead, but we need to ensure every penny of taxpayers' money is well spent, and we need to work with systems to ensure their financial plans are met. On a similar note, and thanks to the efforts of our staff, it was good to see the recent analysis from the IFS that the NHS has turned a corner and is, quote, heading in the right direction when it comes to productivity. Again, we'll talk more about that in a moment, and something Julian and I talked about, as you said a moment ago, Richard, at the Public Accounts Committee. Yeah. And I think, I'll repeat to you what we said then, which is, there is a lot more to do. And we do have ongoing productivity challenges in the NHS and further progress to make. But today's paper does set out the improvements that we are making and the impact that that is having. So I agree with the IFS, I have to say, that things are certainly going in the right direction, and that is thanks to the enormous hard work of colleagues across the country in really focusing on that challenge to make sure that every penny of taxpayers' money is well spent. Can I say a word, if I may, just about the government missions? Because the government has today set out their missions. I'm really pleased to see that the NHS is central to their plans. Obviously, we share the same commitment that the government does to reduce waiting times. And I think I would just take this opportunity to add that there has been some media commentary over the past week about that coming at the expense of services elsewhere. But I would just say, the NHS can and has delivered on multiple fronts. For example, last winter, despite unprecedented periods of industrial action, we delivered improvements in urgent and emergency care performance and reductions in waiting lists. And with December data showing that the waiting list fell despite significant demand for urgent care. So that's not to say that we are not going to have a hugely challenging winter. But NHS staff, even when hindered by those strikes last year, did deliver incredibly high levels of care and pulled out all the stops to do what they could to provide the best possible care for patients. And I'm absolutely certain from what I see every day as I talk to people in the NHS and go around, as you do, Richard, on visits, that commitment has not and will not change. The other mission where we can play a part is securing the highest sustained growth. The NHS does play a really key role as a driver of economic growth, and so really excited about the conversation we're going to have about our health and growth accelerators a bit later. Winter. So we have talked about the preparations for winter at previous meetings, and we have the opportunity to do so again today in more detail. But I think it is just worth noting that we do go into this winter with more pressure than ever before. So we've published today our first of the weekly winter sit reps. it being the start of December. And you will have seen already that there are some concerning figures in it. So we are heading into winter with a 350% increase in flu cases in hospitals and an 86% rise in norovirus compared to the same month last year. And that shows, I think, just already how busy our frontline teams are. And that is with an average of over 96,500 hospital beds occupied each day, more so, again, at this point in any other year. So comparing this point in time with previous years at this point in time. So expected pressure still to come, because obviously we are only at the beginning of December, and therefore managing that additional demand and the potential for what I think is being termed a quademic of potential seasonal viruses is, I think, probably top, certainly of mine, and I'm sure other colleagues' worry lists as we sit here today. What that means is, means a number of things, but one of the things it means is our vaccination programme is more important than ever. So it's great news that frontline teams have now delivered more than 27 million vaccinations for flu, COVID and RSV. I think we worked out last week that was, Steve will correct me if I'm wrong, 300 jabs a minute since we launched our winter or our seasonal vaccination campaign. That work needs to continue, so we are protecting our most vulnerable groups, and that, of course, includes our own colleagues. So we really need to make sure that we are supporting staff to get vaccinated if they haven't already done so. And we did write out, I think, yesterday just to encourage people to take the opportunity to protect themselves. Despite all of the efforts, and we'll talk more about this, that we have made, that colleagues have made to prepare as well as possible for winter, I think it is always just worth noting that there are things, of course, outside our control, not least the fact that we know that discharging patients is a huge issue right across the country, and today's data, again, reconfirms that. As Lord Darcy said, and we, again, I think, discussed this as a board many times before, but as he said in his report, of course, underinvestment in capital in particular has left a legacy of crumbling estate and maintenance backlog, which means we still face an uphill struggle to consistently provide the right care in the right place at the right time. But finally, and this is the sort of where we really get a chance to look to the future, I did just want to pick up on what you said about the importance of the work on the 10-year health plan. So, as you said, that engagement process is well underway. If Lord Darcy has done the bit which was setting out a sort of clear diagnosis of what over the last sort of 20 years has been the story of the health service, this is our opportunity to help create what the future will look like. Work streams have been set up. In many cases, we've got NHS colleagues sitting as co-chairs of groups, but more importantly, the public deliberation events have really been running apace, and the engagement work through the website and with staff has already gathered, I know, hugely rich views from the public and others. Colleagues will have their own reflections from the events. Mine from Middlesbrough was just incredibly struck by how keen people were to work with us to identify some of the solutions and really lean into some of the difficult discussions about what it would really take to create an NHS fit for the future. And it certainly said to me that it's been absolutely the right thing to try and do the depth of engagement that the 10-year plan team are currently undertaking. But also a real vote, actually, certainly the group I was in, for the importance of the neighbourhood model, which we've been talking about since Claire Fuller did her stocktake and working on as a group and with other partners since then. So, Richard, I thought I would stop there on the note of optimism for the future, whilst recognising some of the challenges that we're going to discuss in more detail now. So any comments or questions from Amanda? We've had a good conversation again earlier this morning in the private board as well. So thank you. What I would just share then, I think the agenda for today is a very good agenda. Clearly we're going to have the performance updates, operational performance, recovery support programme, financial performance, and then productivity. Again, really important for us to continue to focus on productivity. So we've got May Lee here, who's going to be leading for us on that. A very good topic, a really important topic for the economy, and Adam, welcome on health, work and prevention. So the interaction between health and the economy and people's ability to work and contribute to the workforce.
A review on the quality strategy, very good. And we also know, and Robert's here, the quality committee is also transforming its approach and its agenda. But the quality strategy mentioned strongly in Lord Darcy's report. It's a good topic to have this afternoon. And Steve and Duncan, I know you're going to walk us through that. And then importantly, actually, it might sound a little bit administrative, but actually the delegation of specialised services to ICBs, the continued delegation, is part of that devolution that we're doing, but that controlled and sensible devolution, and in this case looking at particular services, specialised commissioning services, where we're going to be giving more responsibility directly to those ICBs. So I think it's a good agenda. I only started with that partly because I forgot to do something which was really important in my introduction, which is just to note that we're going to be losing Jackie Rock, which is a real regret, actually. You have been a really good, strong leader for NHS England, Jackie, and thank you for all that you have done. You've reformed the commercial and estates portfolio. You've overseen the establishment of a central commercial function, and we're seeing the benefit of that actually in much better procurement pricing and throughout the system, actually, which is really good. And some specific things you've done, you led on the procurement of the FDP, you led on the engagement with the new hospitals programme and government around the RACs and making sure that those themselves are properly brought in. So actually, thank you for all you've done in leading a very good function, and we will miss you.
May I add?
You may.
Actually, I think I'm so sorry, Jackie. It's because I'm actually in complete denial of the fact that you're about to go. But to add to everything you've said about what Jackie's done is in the commercial function, which is now recognised in a way it just wasn't at all before, and has given, I think, a real pride and an importance to that role. And all of those colleagues across the NHS involved in similar roles. I know it's meant a huge amount, but I just wanted to add, as a member of the executive team and the board, Jackie, thank you for your contribution, because, of course, you offer so much to the corporate strength of the leadership of the NHS as well as the functional strength, and we will really miss you for both.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Emily, operational performance update.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the paper presents the NHS's performance in September and October based on the published data. I thought I would start with UEC and winter, which is the key performance challenge at this point in the year. And then I will give an overview of the latest performance statistics for elective cancer diagnostics and mental health. And I wanted to start with the same frame of reference that I've used at the last few boards, which actually Amanda's also just said a version of, which is, as always, these presentations are a story of both extraordinary levels of improvement and creativity in how we deliver every day, at the same time as recognising we are nowhere near where we would want to be. And I hope that the way the data is presented can show both things at the same time, because I think it's important we recognise what we've been able to do as well as what we still have to do. So if we start on UEC, there's no doubt, as people have seen this morning, that UEC performance has started to feel the impact of winter pressures, despite that continued effort and dedication of staff on the front line. We saw that in the data which is in the paper, which is the October published data, and in particular in the Category 2 response times. That backdrop demonstrates the importance of driving the 3 improvement areas that are outlined in the UEC plan: avoiding conveyances, avoiding admissions, and speeding up discharge, all of which will continue to be crucial over the next few months to make sure the system is as resilient as possible. We'll shortly be writing to the system, setting out the importance of a whole system approach to risk across the UEC pathway this winter to provide the safe, high-quality care for our patients while also maintaining elective activity. We know, as Amanda's just mentioned, that flu admissions are already increasing pressure on emergency departments. So the bed occupancy we have at the moment with flu is what we had on the 24th of December this time last year. So I thought it would be worth spending a couple of moments on the vaccination campaign without belabouring it, given it's already been mentioned. But just to emphasise the work that's already gone in through all of the creativity in the vaccine programme to make sure as many eligible people as possible are vaccinated against flu and COVID-19 ahead of winter, as well as the new campaign on RSV. And Amanda's already shared that number, but underneath that number is continued creative and supportive engagement with a variety of communities to make sure that vaccinations are being delivered in ways that work for the communities that we serve. And it may be that the board may want Steve to elaborate on some of the brilliant examples there. If we just issue a bit of a plea to the NHS on that basis, only 24% of healthcare workers at the end of October had received a flu vaccine, and only 14% had received their COVID vaccine. Those numbers have obviously gone up since, but still are not what we would want them to be, and lower than last year. This week, surveillance figures show that flu positivity's increased. We know that vaccination offers the best protection to eligible frontline health and social care workers and to the people who are clinically vulnerable that they're caring for. So we're asking colleagues across the health system to engage with staff about the importance and benefits of vaccination and to ensure staff can easily access their jabs in a way that works for them. So if I now turn to the rest of the detailed data, our most recent published UEC data for October shows deterioration in 4-hour performance and Category 2 response times as pressures started to increase at the end of the summer, which coincided with a wave of COVID cases, which is now coming down or has come down. Total attendances in October increased to 2,356,189, and emergency admissions also increased. Overall, demand continues to grow year on year, with October 2024 total attendances 6.2% above October 23. 4-hour performance in that context was 73%, which is down 1.2 points from September, but 2.8% percentage points above October 23, despite that growth in attendances. So a good example of where the system is doing brilliant things at the same time as we have a long way to go. Category 2 performance also deteriorated, which was up to 42 minutes and 15 seconds in October, 34 seconds worse in that case than October 23, partly reflecting differences in the COVID peak. 12-hour breaches increased in October and are once again significantly above the levels observed this time last year at 49,592 versus 44,655. As we all know, our ambition this year is to ensure that 78% of patients are seen within 4 hours in March 25, as well as improving Category 2 ambulance response times to an average of 30 minutes across the year. We're working with systems to support their plans, including a new improvement offer to those trusts that we saw were particularly struggling to implement all the recommendations in the UEC plan. And we are focused on supporting those systems to achieve an improved position, remembering that in 23-24 we saw a significant improvement in 4-hour performance in the final quarter of the year. Turning to elective, overall the total waiting list decreased by 70,000 between August 24 and September 24 to 7.57 million. And there were reductions in all 4 long wait metrics in September 24 compared to August 24. Specifically, 104-week waits decreased by 11 to 113. 78-week waits decreased by 632 to 2,703. 65-week waits decreased by 22,624 to 22,903. We recognise that in September we missed the initial target for virtual elimination of 65-week waits, but we are asking the NHS to make sure that fewer than 10,000 people are waiting more than 65 weeks for elective care by the 22nd of December. And we're continuing to work closely with the most challenged trusts on that metric to support delivery against that target. Similarly, 18-week waits have decreased by 47,000 from 3,189,538 to 3,142,530. Within that, performance against the 18-week standard remains broadly stable at 58.5%. In the coming weeks, we will publish the elective reform plan, which will set out how we plan to work with systems and partners to achieve the constitutional target that the Prime Minister has spoken about today. Most importantly, as part of that reform, it will outline how we will put patients and their experience of care at the heart of that reform. On cancer, levels of urgent suspected cancer referrals are down 0.6% on the last year, with 12,665 patients seen per working day in September 24. In September, none of the 3 cancer waiting time standards were met, but all 3 have improved if we compare September 24 to September 23, which means we remain confident about the delivery for the end of the year. For example, performance against the faster diagnostic standard saw a seasonal decrease of 0.7% on the previous month, but was up 5.1% year on year. On diagnostics, our published statistics show the total waiting list stood at 1.587 million at the end of September, with the percentage of patients waiting over 6 weeks for a diagnostic test standing at 22.7%, improving from 26.3% in September 23. And given the additional capacity we've put in the system, we are delighted to see that activity continues to be delivered, with almost every month this year setting a record, which includes September at almost 2.37 million diagnostic tests carried out. On mental health, we have improved access to specialist community perinatal mental health and maternal mental health services in the 12 months to September 24 to 60,637 people, which is a almost 100% increase in the 12 months to August 24. The national team continue to work with regions to provide support to systems on access and other perinatal ambitions by collating and sharing best practice from high-performing systems, as well as working to strengthen links across the perinatal mental health pathway, which is a good example, which I haven't covered in the other areas, of where we are working with systems, with our regions, to try and reduce variation in performance, particularly where one system or one organisation has fixed a problem that is being experienced elsewhere. On children and young people, accessing service increased to 798,479 in the 12 months to September 24. That's slightly ahead of where system plans predicted we would be at this point in the year, perhaps reflecting the nationally led improvement offers that are in place to support systems to improve access, as well as quality and effectiveness of the children and young people's community services, as well as improving data quality, which has been a fairly substantive barrier to some of our work in mental health, when actually it has not always been transparent exactly where the performance challenges are. We also have improved in the 12 months of September 24, the 673,153 people completing a course of treatment with NHS talking therapies, where we are meeting a reliable improvement rate and fractionally below, or hopefully on goal, to reliable recovery. I'll just finish with talking about physical health checks for people with severe mental illness, which were delivered to 272,874 people in the 12 months to September 24, which accounts for 57% of people on the GPSMI registers, and mention that the dementia diagnosis rate is at 65.5% in September 24 against a target of 70%. This is one where there is tremendous variation across the country, and I continue to encourage sharing of best practice between regions via the Regional Delivery Forum to see if we can solidify that so that we can meet the target and better support people living with dementia. Just before you go to questions, Chair, sorry, rather than me, I just wondered if it was worth hearing from Sarah Jane briefly on where we're at with current challenges in the system given winter before we go to broader questions.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, actually. Thank you. And then we will go to questions.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and thank you, Chair. Just, as Emily described, we're really starting to feel some of those challenges now on the ground. We've had this rising tide of RSV, which has been principally impacting children, but making lots of parts of our UEC pathway really busy. And we're starting to see now the quite steep rise in flu cases, lots of which is compounded by the norovirus, not least because, as Amanda mentioned, where we've got estates constraints, it can be quite difficult to manage cases safely when we've only got sort of a smaller number of cubicles. So that's all leading to the higher bed utilisation and our congested emergency departments, which in turn has impacted on handover delays. So our absolute focus at the moment, right from NHS England through our regions, systems and trusts, is to really focus on quality and safety, and to do everything we can in particular to avoid the very longest waits that some of our patients might experience. So trying to avoid wherever possible the longest handover delays, and particularly some of the waits for mental health patients that we sometimes see in our emergency departments, which we know are exceptionally distressing for everybody. And despite really challenging circumstances, we are starting to make some headway with that through real system working and mental and physical health services coming together. And we're also working using the full strength really of our clinical offer in NHS England, our ESIS, so the Emergency Care Intensive Support Team, and GIRFT colleagues. So we have experienced clinicians that can help some of our clinical teams on the ground in the most challenging organisations with real hands-on support to be able to provide best practice. So the challenge has started, but I think everybody across the NHS has stepped up and is ready for that. It will be a difficult few weeks to come, but I just want to say a huge thank you, to reiterate those of Amanda's and Emily's, to our teams. People are going to extraordinary lengths. We'll talk about productivity later in some of the figures, but I see people staying many hours beyond shifts, getting up at extraordinary times in the morning to check that our patients are safe, and I know that people will continue to do that throughout winter. So, a challenging few weeks to come, but I think all of our systems and processes are stood up in preparation, and from NHS England, we will do everything we can to support frontline services to maintain quality and safety over the coming weeks.
Very good. So can we open up to questions for Emily or Sarah Jane? Any particular comments, questions? Andrew, then Wal.
So, Andrew Morris, Deputy Chair. So, we're 2 percentage points up compared to where we were last year on 4 hours, which is good. And we're likely to treat another 1 million people by the end of this financial year, which is quite astonishing, recognising we've opened very little extra capacity compared to last winter. So that performance, I think, is really, really positive. My kind of question is around 12 hours, and what is it that we're doing this year that we weren't doing last year in terms of some of the initiatives that we're making or taking within systems? Because I think that's the challenge we've got, really, to try and improve people's experiences, because no one likes being in an emergency department full stop. Waiting for 12 hours or more for a bed is, a particular challenge for individuals and families.
So can I just suggest between Emily and Sarah Jane, let's take a few of the questions and then answer them.
Pens out, Chair.
Pens out. I can see Emily's writing all the time. So Wal, then Robert.
So just to build on Andrew's point, I'm thinking about the flow rate. 96% occupancy is running very hot. And I'm sort of thinking about, or asking about, what are we doing to improve the flow rate through hospitals so that as we get, again, I'm hearing a hint that this winter it's a bit earlier, the peaks, it looks like it's going to happen. We're managing, was it a quademic, did you say? Potential quademic. And yet we're running very, very hot. And what sort of plans do we have in place to make sure we get through in a good manner and that the patients get a decent experience through that?
Robert?
A comment on the primary care data and a question about mental health. So the primary care data, the fact that just over 50% of all practice appointments took place on the same day as the booking is impressive, and it's slightly out of kilter with the public perception of GP access, yeah. And 90% within 14 days. So that's just a comment. On the mental health front, the talking therapies is a great success story because it's clearly an evidence-based intervention, and the numbers are impressive of 700,000 treated. My question was, I don't have a sense as to what fraction of demand that is. So what's the denominator, as it were?
Very good. And then Jane, do you want to come in and then we'll take that first
It was just a little, Jane Ellison, Non-Executive Director. It was just a little pick up on what Amanda and Emily mentioned around vaccination, just to see if there was any more capacity to get more from further vaccination of members of the public, as we're not yet through this, through Christmas, and whether there was more to be got from another push.
And then if I add mine, just before we then go to the question, which is, if we think about discharge and discharge into care, have we got any perspectives on capacity in care, the provision of sort of care packages by local authorities? How we've seen that as we now approach the sort of more difficult winter months? That would be a question. So I don't know how you're going to team this. And I
was just going to start on 12 hours just with a frame, but then maybe turn to Sarah Jane to talk a bit more in more detail about that and the flow rate, which should also include the care packages, and then I can come back to the others. But just on 12 hours, which obviously is a really good question, it's worth thinking about it in the two categories. So those who go on to be admitted, which is about 2/3, and those who go straight home, having been in the department more than 12 hours, because actually the experience is probably quite different from a patient perspective. But Sarah Jane, do you want to come in with what you've been doing on that?
Yeah, so it's our number one concern, Andrew, absolutely. So the kind of, as Emily set out, our actions are really under the three headings. One, we need to do everything we possibly can for patients that could be supported through urgent community response, virtual wards, other sorts of alternatives to admission at the point that they first ring 999. That is starting to become more and more successful, but we need to keep pushing the boundaries of that, because lots of the patients that are conveyed to hospital for all good reason at the time are not getting a huge medical benefit from the stay. So that's just the most effective thing that we can do, and we need to keep really focused on that. The second is when patients do arrive at hospital where they don't really need the full admission, the SDEC pathways are there as extensive as they can be through all of the specialties and resilient throughout the day. So sometimes it becomes more difficult as the day progresses to use SDEC. Again, that is showing to be a really effective intervention, but we've got quite a lot of variation there. And then beyond that, it is that flow into the hospital and the discharge and the senior clinical decision making. The teams that are on the ground that I mentioned, ESIST and GERVT, the number one thing that they work on is the medical job planning to ensure that people have got sufficient time to be able to dedicate to UEC care pathways, be that the acute medical units or the wards and so on. When we start to get into the real challenges, well, it really is about what can we do in terms of escalation. So we do, our core bed capacity is almost at the maximum now that we are funded to deliver, but we have got the ability to be able to escalate into certain parts of the hospital for periods of time. We are then absolutely, it's about the quality, and Duncan's team have done some work on just really making sure that the basic fundamental standards of care are there for all of our patients, no matter where they might be in an organisation, if they are in an area that we wouldn't ordinarily use for urgent and emergency care. And then just finally on discharge, at the moment, the numbers are holding, but I think we're all collectively concerned. And when I say we, it is ourselves and our colleagues in DHSC and social care leaders, just as we start to move into next year, that we will start to see an increasing challenge with social care capacity, both in terms of some of the funding available through local authorities, but also some of the care packages that social care providers are able to deliver. So it's something that we're working closely on together, particularly in the areas where there's challenged UEC performance, to ensure that those two things are looked at collectively, and we're doing everything we can to prioritise again that flow and safety for patients. So, as I say, lots happening, but even despite all of those things, we know that there'll be challenging weeks to come. Thank you.
Steve, do you want to say something about the vaccination rate?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Thanks, Jane. So I won't repeat all of the points that have been made about where we're at in the current campaign, other than just to highlight that on flu in particular, for over 65s, we're slightly ahead of where we were last year, so about 500,000 more vaccinations in that particular group, which is particularly important than last year. We started the flu and COVID campaigns a bit later this year because it's clinically beneficial to vaccinate closer to winter. So we started on the 3rd of October. And just to your point, Jane, the campaigns for flu and COVID will run on the main offer until the 20th of December. So it's definitely not too late. There are around 1 million appointments available every week. People can book them dead easily, either on the NHS app, the National Booking Service, or they can ring 119 if those methods don't work. And there are more sites across general practice and community pharmacy than we've ever had. So the offer is pretty convenient this year. And we'd really encourage people who haven't yet had their jabs to go and book an appointment. People can book to get a flu and COVID jab together if they want to get them at the same time. And then maybe just to touch on the point, Jane, about Emily and Amanda both made about RSV. That's an all year round offer. So whilst COVID and flu are kind of campaigns and have a start and an end point, RSV is offered year round for the older adult cohort and for pregnant women. So again, maternity units are doing a great job of offering vaccination to pregnant women, and general practice are calling in 75 to 80-year-olds for their RSV jab. So if people haven't yet been invited, they could contact their general practice if they want to get a jab.
Just quickly on the other, was only one thing, because I think your primary care point was a recognition as opposed to a question. So on mental health, the statistic that we collect is not the people waiting, it's the people receiving a course of treatment. So I don't have a clear denominator, and it's a good example of where we have transparency over some parts of the mental health data and some other parts. I'll pick that up with the team. The thing to develop on that point, because as you say, it's a proven therapy, is the difference between the percentage achieving reliable improvement and reliable recovery. And the team is very focused at the moment on obviously increasing those percentages so that we're not just tracking those completing a course of treatment, which is the number that I referred to, but the 67% achieving reliable improvement and 48% achieving reliable recovery targets. So that's an illumination, but not actually an answer to the question.
Okay, thank you. Shall we move on to the update on the recovery support programme, Emily, which you and Jan are leading into for us, I think?
Thank you. So I'll just say a few words to introduce. Sorry?
To explain it, what it is.
To explain what it is.
Yeah.
Well, the RSP stands for Recovery Support Programme, and the RSP approach has been in place since June of 2021, providing focused intensive support and oversight to the most challenged ICBs and providers in the country. We wanted to take the opportunity to update the board on the work of the RSP and to discuss how we'll continue to develop and mature our approach over the coming months as the operating model evolves. I'm delighted that Jan Thomas, who's our new National Director, can join us for the session today. RSP replaced the previous special measures programmes that people probably be familiar with the language around. At the moment, there are 20 NHS providers and 3 ICBs enrolled in RSP, and that list of organisations is kept up to date on the NHSC website, so it's publicly available information. RSP can be applied to an individual organisation or to a whole system, which will comprise the ICB as well as the constituent NHS providers. When an organisation enters RSP, each organisation undergoes a diagnostic to identify the drivers of underperformance, and that then informs the development of an integrated improvement plan that will cover all aspects of challenging performance, which includes finance, quality, operations and organisational culture. Crucially, the RSP is designed to provide support just for a time-limited period, and one of the first things the team do is to work with leaders to identify what the exit criteria are and what is the estimated exit date. We support the organisations to exit the programme and then continue to provide oversight to ensure improvements are sustained. As the paper before the board highlights, almost all the organisations in RSP experience changes to board-level leadership through their time in the programme, with changes to Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer and Chair being the most common. We've seen this play out, indeed, just over the last few months, where changes in leadership in several organisations have helped to provide energy, focus and grip to make improvement happen. We know we've got more to do, though, to strengthen leadership in the most challenged places, and we're developing a more systematic way of identifying and developing talented leaders and matching them to roles where they can make the biggest impact. When in post, that means we need to give leaders the right flexibilities, incentives and support to turn things around, given the challenging nature of many of the roles that are involved. We do already do that in many places across the country, but there's an opportunity to be more systematic, both in identification and mobilisation of talented leaders. We are also looking to evolve our overall approach to RSP, which Jan may want to say a few words on, most critically making sure that our diagnostic really gets at the underlying drivers of underperformance as opposed to the symptoms that may have been the reason that the organisation went into the RSP programme in the first place. We want to make sure that organisations in RSP are able to remain focused on their most foundational challenges. And it's an opportunity for this board too, because the NHSE support needs to be clear, needs to be agile, it needs to be well coordinated and expert in all of the areas that need to be addressed in RSP, as well as focused on supporting organisations to address the key drivers of the performance challenges. So as we evolve that, we're working closely with Steve and with Adam Doyle and others to ensure the improvements we're making to RSP align with the new operating model and the updated oversight and assessment framework, and make the most of some of the improvement resources Sarah Jane's already mentioned, and the whole spectrum from improvement to assurance and performance management. So I'll just hand over to Jan to take us through some of the detail in the paper.
Thank you, Emily. So I'm Jan Thomas. I'm the National Director for RSP, and I'm also the Chief Executive of Cambridge and Peterborough, who's been in RSP and out of RSP. So it's a bit of user experience here on this one applied as well. So look, RSP and what we try to do is really difficult, and it's really difficult because these are often large challenges that are deep and complex and not solved by pulling one lever and something happens. They're often to do with not just cultural issues or operational issues, but actually there are often some deep structural issues there that we have to deal with. So these are issues that are going to not be fixed within 2 or 3 months. It is about how do you get the changes and momentum around improvement, and I think that's an important word. How do we get the momentum? And then how do we build the foundations for this to be sustainable? Because the success criteria should be, are they still improving in 2 years' time, as well as did they exit the programme? And I think having been through the programme, building those foundations is the most important element. And those foundations, as Emily highlighted, are not single. They are around the quality, the performance and the finance together, and how those things interact alongside medical leadership to make sure we've got the balance right on that quadrant to make and making sure that's sustainable. So what we do now, as Emily has outlined, is around how do we get the diagnostic, how do we then apply regulation, how do we then really drive the targeted approach to the support. But obviously, because I've said these are complex issues, we also lean in with support. We've got excellent support into a number of our RSP from the Tier 1 support for UEC, for example, where it complements the work that we are doing to drive the sustainability. Going forward, what we are concentrating on is what I describe as the kind of quadrant approach to diagnostics. And what I mean by that is, how do we really balance what is happening operationally, clinically, with quality and finance, and how do we really use that quadrant to assess what are the right solutions for those organisations. From that, we can then have clear accountability, and then from that, we can have the clear improvement plan, which will be different for different organisations. But actually, we think that looking at that improvement plan over a 2-year period and measuring the improvements that they're making statistically along those measures is the way through on it. As Emily's also mentioned, we're not doing this alone. There are some real helpful interdependencies. The work on management and leadership is really critical to make sure we're aligning people with the right skill sets to do this, because this is a difficult thing to do, and it is a skill set that usually follows a roadmap of how you get that change and transformation, and that's what we're really focusing on going forward.
Thank you. So, Andrew, do you want to comment, because you do quite a lot of lead for NHS England board?
So I think it's a really good paper, Jan, and it will change our approach to this. And at the end of the day, NHS England should be there to support organisations to improve. That's what this is about. It's not necessarily the regulatory bit. And historically in the NHS, we've emphasised too much on that, in my opinion. However, we've got both to discharge. Yeah. But I think the improvement bit is really key, and NHS England making the right diagnostic call around what's wrong with this organisation is a key bit, because often we haven't quite got that right, in my experience of chairing some of these meetings. I also think that we have not held culture in the highest regard around why organisations fail, and the relationship between the board and the clinicians. which we take for granted in some situations, but actually that's the key. And when we place chief execs into these situations, newly appointed chief execs, we should give them time and space. It takes 3 to 5 years to turn an organisation around. And the chief exec is one individual, and over time that individual's got to get the right team around them to transform that organisation. All of that takes a lot of time. But if we've got confidence in the people we appoint, we should give them the space. I think on culture, the bit that I would suggest is that we're clear around what's wrong, but we ask the board to give us the markers of change over a period of time, so we can, monitor the progress, because it does take time. And if you take, say, East Kent as a good example, I mean, we are seeing some positive changes now, and the chief exec there has had 3 years in post. And she's making some really, really good progress, and we should back those individuals all the way, providing we've got confidence in them. Yeah. So I welcome this approach, and I think it's a superb bit of work. But I think NHS England has got to get its act together a bit better in understanding what the fundamental issues are around what's wrong with this particular organisation, and giving the board space and time to improve.
Yeah, I think the diagnostic. Well, wants to come in, but the diagnostic's important. The phrase I always used to use was causes, not symptoms. Yes. And actually, that's what we've really got to find here. But you want to come in?
Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. So, Wal Colladi, Deputy Chair. Following Andrew Morris, when he's such a wise old man in terms of describing this, it's really difficult. But I actually have got a slightly different question. So in the private sector, when you have a sort of turnaround process in place, and you highlighted the fact that often you see change in terms of leadership teams, so chair, chief exec, finance director, the key or rate limiting factor tends to be finding the talent. So what you tend to do when you're finding talent is take more risk. And that means, I don't want to put someone in who's got exactly everything I need to make this change. You actually say, I have someone who has the potential to make this change. Can we just talk a bit about whether we're using that approach, whether that's completely not consistent with this environment? I'm just interested to know.
Yeah. Come in. Are you gathering questions, Chair?
Okay, yeah, I should be gathering questions. Thank you.
Good coaching.
Good coaching, very necessary. So we're going to go Duncan and Amanda. Duncan?
Yeah, 2 points. One, first, just to say, I think the value of the improvement directors and the work that they do, I think is, having worked with a number of them now, I think we should pay tribute to the work that they do, and colleagues in the regions as well that work alongside them. I guess my question was around learning, taking the learning that comes out of the RSP across the entire NHS, particularly as we think about how do we get upstream of some of the issues and the findings. We've been trying to do that as part of the maternity safety support programme and working alongside you and colleagues, but really kind of making sure that we get upstream and actually we don't get into the need for organisations to go into RSP in the first place. We can take the wider learning.
Yeah. Okay. Amanda, do you want to do your
question?
question?
I've got questions as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
Comment just to say to Jan, thank you very much indeed for this, I thought, excellent paper, and for indeed coming and offering your expertise to help lead the work. 2 things that I strongly agree with. One is this point you've made about improvement, and I just wanted to pick up on Andrew's point, because I think there's just a question for me about how we really measure that, because in objective terms, things can take a while before you start to see that, coming through in the data, but actually there can be a lot that's going on sort of under the headlines that I think we sometimes struggle to really be able to pull that out and tell and really see what's going on. So how would we measure it, and how would we account for, if you like, your point, Andrew, about it takes time so that things are moving in the right direction, and you can therefore sort of stick with it for longer and have the confidence to do so. Second point that I again strongly agree with is, and again I think Secretary of State's been clear about this, we need to back the leaders who are going to go to some of our most challenged places, and we need to give them the support they need to be successful, because I completely agree this is not about heroic individuals who can sort of make magic happen. This is about teams, and it's also about the right support around them and the right long-term sort of investment. I don't necessarily mean in money terms, but I mean in sort of time and energy and the wider partnership coming around those organisations. So again, just be grateful for your thoughts, Jan, on how we get the balance right between, on one hand, of course, appropriate accountability, but on the other, kind of really backing the people who are doing the hardest jobs. But my question was also just about finance and quality, because RSP sort of folded two previous regimes that were the finance special measures and quality special measures, the logic being partly that by having them as two separate things, those organisations that were almost inevitably struggling with both could end up being given sort of two competing sets of directions. So I think that was the right idea, but my question is really, have we got that right yet as a way of kind of getting the right focus on both? Because as we look to the future, that focus on productivity, on value for money is going to be absolutely crucial, but so is the focus on quality and access and improving services for patients.
So do you want to have a go at those? Who wants to go for Emily, Jan? You take yours and then hand to Jan what you want.
Yeah, I mean, we work as one, so we can probably both do most of
Yeah, you can double team it.
I might, given I've probably already expressed an opinion on the finance and quality piece, I might let Jan pick that one up. I was just going to start talk on the leadership one, which several people have picked up. But just quickly, Duncan, on your upstream point, completely agree, and that has been a key discussion with the regional directors, who all have their own ways of sort of identifying the systems they're worried about, but we may not yet have spotted for various reasons. And one of my goals with all of the work that we're doing on data is to get better at figuring out what are the metrics that tend to go off sooner rather than later, as you say, and trying to address it. And of course, all the work that Miranda Carter and Steve's team has done to develop the new oversight framework, I think, is hopefully building on that, and there'll no doubt be more improvements to come. On the leadership point, we spent some time talking to people who were the kind of people we tend to ask to take on these challenges earlier in the year, which is work that Anne Eden and Leslie Watts have sponsored, which has been brilliant. And those leaders mentioned several things. The first thing was about backing them. It was about support. It was the point Andrew made about, look, it's going to take 3 to 5 years. So when the first thing doesn't happen, or I lift up a stone and it turns out there's yet another thing underneath it that you didn't already know, like, you need to back me because it's going to take me a while to do that. And they did comment on the sort of personal risk that people feel when they take these kind of jobs. I don't think we have an answer to that, because obviously it's quite a challenging external environment on that front, but I think that is something we need to think about. They talked about incentives, and that's often a question we get asked, is like, can we sort of pay people danger money effectively? I'm not saying people are going to object to that, but that wasn't what people were asking for. They were asking for support more than anything else, and practical support also to change their teams, because it can be quite hard sometimes to, particularly when you're new, to make the right decisions in a new team environment. So there were a few things I wanted. Those were a few things I wanted to pull out of that diagnostic. Jan may want to mention others. The other point I wanted to pick up, well, I think it was partly from you, is the work that we've been doing with Navina's team, though, on trying to identify earlier in their careers people who have the right sort of intrinsic capabilities for this, but don't yet have the right experience, and then supporting them to make sure they do have the right experience and the right career path, particularly things like brilliant clinical leaders who need broader general management experience, because one of the things we're identifying from the work Jan's doing on the diagnostic is the absolute centrality of the medical director being in the right space with the CEO, the CNO and the CFO to absolutely drive that performance. So if I to pause there for a second, I haven't covered everything, but Jan will want to elaborate from her perspective.
Yeah, so just I just want to, I'll start with the last question and then work backwards. So I've yet to find somewhere that really has finances nailed without quality issues, or quality issues without finance. They are intrinsically linked, and I think we've got to get our heads around, even though we're seeing one thing, that we should probably explore what else is happening. I think that is probably how we should think about this, and that's why that quadrant approach is so important, because it isn't just this one area doing well, it's the interactions between them and the balancing of risk and understanding that conscious decisions individuals and boards are making in order to balance that risk off between quality, finance and performance. And I think rather than just we're determined not just to say, here's the chief exec and chair, we're saying actually it's a team effort, and if you get that balance right, and that could take longer, but actually that will drive the sustainability. So I think, Amanda, to your point, I think you've got to keep it together, because it won't just be one thing, but let's not just make it quality and finance, let's make it how do you get the clinical change along with the operations, etc. In terms of measuring, I think this is really interesting because I've looked at charts forever, and we get more reporting than ever before, don't we, about is this getting better, isn't worse? And I can't emphasise enough, we have to start looking and continually looking at the statistical improvement over a longer period of time, rather than just saying what was the performance at this point, because that is what causes momentum and that's what gives confidence in organisations. And what I would say is we quite often go, this one thing is going well. The key to what we're talking about with momentum is can they do more than one thing well at the same time and improve? Because otherwise it's that good old whack-a-mole, isn't it, if we're not careful. So I think when we're talking about momentum, it's not just how do you do one thing, it's how do you do more than one thing together better. I think just on the point about leaders, I think is really important. My personal opinion on this is it usually takes a different kind of person to maintain a good organisation and make it grow than actually to go into something quite difficult, be able to prioritise really quickly, get to the nub of it, diagnose it. And I think we need to think about that when we're talking about this, because we assume that it's a person that can go in and do, but it might be that actually we need a tag team of a longer term solution, but actually somebody who can go in and support people, because it is difficult and it is a skill set and it's tiring, and we have to recognise that for people. But it's really inspiring as well, because these people are usually people who can really listen. And I think, we shouldn't underplay things like the staff surveys and how we're really listening to those to get that momentum. But that might be a different kind of person than we thought about in the past.
Thank you. Can I'm going to move us on, if that's all right. I think it's, as Andrew said, and Andrew, you chair most of the board-to-boards on behalf of NHS England in the RSP programme. I do some of them, but a fraction of what you do. I think they're a really good intervention. Actually, they're supportive, which is the right style, and they are diagnostic, and we can improve our diagnostics to find the true causes. I think it's been a very good conversation. Thank you. And Jan, thank you for leading in this space. Very good. Thank you very much. Julian, can we go on to a financial update?
Sure. So the paper presented, the things to bring out in it are, number one, we are currently working to a total budget for NHS England of £186.6 billion. That is updated following the budget for the cost of the pay deals that the government finalised over the summer, and the extra funding provided by the Treasury, or at least them having fixed the amount of funding that is available for elective activity. It does not yet, well, actually that is the budget as we have it for this year. That's important just to understand when we then come on to just looking ahead a bit to next year. Overall, at the end of month 7, we are 725 million off plan. That is about 150 million worse than this time last month when we were looking at month 6. Basically, the kind of run rate of cost expenditure within systems has improved, but not by as much as they were planning. So, although, on the one hand, an improvement, on the other hand, still by not as much as is needed. I will say we have now, though, played in the funding for the pay deals. We're clear that we are covering the cost of overperformance on electivity. We have funded the direct costs of industrial action. So, you know, we have sort of met the conditions we set out at the beginning of the year when we agreed plans with boards and systems, and therefore, you know, our expectation really is that then ICBs and providers delivered the financial plans that their boards agreed that they submitted to us and that we agreed with them. Now, despite the fact we are slightly off plan, there are, you know, a lot of positive things happening at the end of month 7. People have delivered £4 billion of cost improvement plans against a goal to get to about 9.3 by the end of the financial year. That is significantly more than last year, even though it is about 200 or 300 million less than they had been planning to do. So you can see the sort of stretch that people are putting in, but you know, we're not quite holding to the goal. We can see agency spend is down. I mean, we've spent £600 million less on agency staffing for the period to the end of month 7 this year compared to the comparable period last, and you know, currently we'll be on track to be somewhere between 2.2 and 2.3 billion pounds of spend. So that's like about £1.5 billion lower than we were spending 2 years ago. I mean, the thing now is we really need to turn our attention to total temporary staffing spend, given that, you know, still substantive staff recruitment is going well. Productivity, we'll come to it in a more detailed paper, is up again year on year, so we can see continued recovery up to the end of August, including the impact of the strike in the early summer. It's about 1.8% higher than, again, for the same period last year. You know, we have flagged that we are very concerned about the performance of some systems. We launched sort of a programme to properly investigate whether people had plans, whether they were credible, and if they didn't, to do something about it. And, you know, for most of the systems with which we have engaged, we have seen an improvement of about like sort of £190 million in their expenditure run rate, which is better than the average in those systems where we haven't done the sort of intensive investigation. So I think that is like a positive sign of the impact. But we do remain substantially concerned about a few systems where I think the evidence is they are not, that their plans aren't robust and that they're not turning it around. And as per, in fact, the conversation we have just had, you know, we will need to look at, you know, what the next steps are to, I mean, effectively achieve turnaround, not just this year, but actually to put people back on a sustainable path. I mean, overall, despite that position, as I look at total spending and spending on medicines and training budgets and, you know, various other things, I'm still at this point confident we will live within the mandate. But look, it is going to be very tight, and we are looking for systems to get, you know, to basically deliver the plans they have said, accepting that I think there are some who won't, and as I said, we are looking at like what the next appropriate steps are to take. And as I think Andrew was saying earlier, I mean, our focus has to be, does the board as a whole have a plan? Do they understand it? And are they implementing it? This is not just the job of the finance director, this is the whole team.
Can I just, Jan, I know you've got to run. Thank you very much for what you're doing, and thank you for coming to the board. Thank you.
I will just say on capital briefly, we are sort of, you know, I mean, people are basically on track to spend pretty much the whole of the budget we have given them. And we are working through to make sure we maximise the opportunity of all the capital available to the Department of Health. Clearly, it's whatever the date is, it's the 5th of December, so we're approaching that time of the year where people wait with bated breath for us to issue the kind of planning guidance for next year. We are still in discussions with both the department and the government on the final budget. There are still some important details to be finalised, including the funding for employer NICs. So all of that is ongoing. We're in discussions about what we think it can achieve, consistent with the government's priorities. We are still aiming to get planning guidance out before Christmas, days rather than hours before Christmas would be good. And we will be talking to system leaders about it. I mean, I think as Amanda has said in her introductory remarks and indeed elsewhere, look, next year will financially be tougher than this year. Once you've accounted for inflation, spending growth will be about 2% next year, and that has to cover, and the government is clear, any paid settlement, all activity that we are doing, and any other pressures that arise. So look, it will be tougher, and it is absolutely why people need to get their spend rate on a path which is sustainable. So even if they've got problems through this year, they really do need to focus on where they get to by the end of March.
Thank you. So, that message is a really important one out clearly into the systems about this coming year. Well, this year is a tough year, but actually next year, if anything, is tougher. And if I can just share and test with you what's on my mind, and it partly actually, have you had conversations in the CFO advisory group, so other colleagues around the table who sat with that. So I always carry certain sort of metrics. One which is quite interesting is that every 1% increase in pay is about 1.3 billion. I'm also struck by that metric you gave about how hard the NHS is working. So 9 billion of essentially cost efficiencies targeted for this year, 24-25, which is up on the 7 billion achieved actually in 23 and 24. And actually the overall productivity we're running at are pretty good levels actually currently at about 1.8%, we think is the likely productivity benefit we get. So they're quite important sort of dynamics as you come into this. But what I think really is important, and I just want to make sure that my and other non-exec colleagues' understanding is right here, that if you go back and focus on the 22 billion or so, the additional and very really welcome commitment from government and from the Secretary of State, which was a really important, clear commitment to help us deal with actually continuing exponential growth in demand, which is what we're seeing. If I look at how that plays out, to an extent it's front-loaded into 24-25, and within that, the numbers I hold is that just the pay awards already agreed to, given, eats up about 8.5 billion. Non-pay awards is about 1.25 billion, I think, and then there is this pension revaluation you talked to us about, which is an obvious necessary pensions revaluation. It's necessary and wholly appropriate accounting, but it's another 2 billion. And then other areas not captured just in those three pockets of money would be the cost of elective recovery running at 118%. We were budgeted about 107%, I think, at the start of the year. So the machine in terms of value-weighted electives is running stronger, and that does cost more money. So that is a significant extra drag. And then clearly the annual growth we get just in demand, actually, again, that will be some billions in terms of additional costs. So you see those, and you can see that there's a quite large amount of the 22 billion essentially already absorbed in current activity levels and medicine increases and in pay increases and inflation in the first of the 2 years for which the 22 billion arrives. So we then look at next year, where we can see for the department, of which we're clearly a major part of the cost, an additional 10 billion, which probably gives you some indication of how we're trying to manage what's the proportion of the 22 that's front-loaded, as long as we can manage those pressures. And we don't have a finalised budget yet, and that, I think, is where you and Amanda and Emily and other execs around the table are engaged in a really interesting and challenging set of choices around that money. But if you think about that, then 10 billion, that has got to deal with pay award. It's got to deal, and again, it goes back to that, for every 1%, there's 1.3 billion. It's got to deal with non-pay inflation. It's got to deal with demand growth. So what sort of demand growth would we get? And what it tells you actually is that It's a really important commitment from the government that they've given us, but actually decisions already made and in run rates already in play, it strikes me that's why going into next year we've got a worse position. Worse is the wrong word. We've got a much tighter position than we had even this year. Now, that's my picture. I don't know, Jeremy or Wal or others, if you have a different view on those components. And I just want to test really whether, what's the mistake in that high-level analysis?
If we start with sort of the comments, I mean, Amanda said right at the beginning about the money is important. Julian, you just sort of laid out, and the Chair has further expanded on this. I mean, it's super critical we give the right messages to the system.
Yeah.
And in trying to understand...
And to our partners.
And to our partners. And trying to understand, you know, the government's made a very powerful commitment to the NHS, to 22 billion, but really making sure we understand how that plays out. And my sense is, again, I'm here to be corrected, that actually, despite that, it's still going to be very tough. And I think just really getting to some detail as to why that's the case would be very helpful. I don't know, if you
You're a live finance director.
I'm a live finance director, and I know I'm in the retail sector. Jeremy Townsend, and I'm chair of the audit committee. In the retail sector, there's national insurance increases potentially hitting primary care, and there's inflation is probably going to be higher than we expected through the system. So I think that the detail on that. The other question, and it may be early days in the process, because the other thing that strikes me, which is a slightly different piece on this, is not only understanding the numbers for the current year and the future year, but as we're heading into a 10-year plan, and we're looking how demand isn't going to go away in the future, it's going to increase. Are we going to be facing this very tight situation of year? And we've talked about productivity, and we're going to talk about productivity later on. Is there going to be capacity in the numbers next year to make the investments we might want to make in driving productivity, so that we can try and get ahead of the game? So I think there's the challenge around how does the money that we've got access to fund the inflationary increases, but where is our thinking, or is it to be progressed in terms of how we try and deliver productivity in the system to try and get ahead of the game for not even next year but future years?
So what's wrong with that analysis?
It's quite long.
Analysis is a big word for what we just ran through, but what's wrong with
The
this?
analysis is broadly right, and you've just sort of outlined the costs you've got to deal with: pay, non-pay inflation, medicines prices, this year, and it reflects the degree of prioritisation we've already done this year, and done with the department and ministers to make sure that can actually afford to do the things which are their priorities. And in particular, I would say, how we keep going on reducing the waiting list, which we are year on year. The waiting list is down. But there's been a lot of prioritisation, and it's why the focus on actually cost control, productivity is so important. And as we look ahead to next year, as I've said, for the reasons you again have just said and outlined, there isn't really going to be new money for new activity. We're going to have to do it through productivity. And even after that, I suspect we will face some tough choices. We are going through that exercise with the Secretary of State at the moment, where he is really forcing us and the department to examine everything we do and make sure the money is being spent on the things that matter,
the biggest priorities,
and their priorities. And we're going to have to make within NHS England, we will have to make further choices about where our resources and our people are deployed, and we are going to have to move things around. We need to create the headroom, in fact, to really launch and scale up a national improvement programme, because it's only through exactly, again, some of the stuff we were talking about under the RSP agenda item, that we, by just through continuous improvement, better use of the resources that already exist, allied to the reforms that, for example, Vin, but others are driving around this table, the work Navina is doing on improving staffing, retentions and working conditions. It's only through those things will we manage to, sort of hold and improve patient access and care, because next year, there won't be resources for new activity. We're going to really have to, it will be through productivity and reform. And if boards have not got a grip on this, they are going to find themselves in some difficulty.
So Andrew, I'm going to bring you for the last comment, but against that picture of I didn't see Mary. So Mary first and Andrew, but the picture I carry is effectively the 22 billion is already more than committed or absorbed in inflationary run rate and other activities. And that's why when we look into this year, 25-26, we've got some really difficult prioritisation calls and challenges and productivity challenges, which we must meet, but we've got really difficult messages. So Mary and then Andrew, and then I'll move us on.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you for that really thorough explanation. But for me, I'm celebrating the fact that we're reducing agency costs significantly, which will improve continuity of care, which in turn should become, productivity improvement. But also, because we are being absolutely clear that there is not significant extra money next year, I think the whole board would agree that we are still pleased that the pay increase to those clinical staff was welcomed by us, and it has reduced the strike days, and that we wouldn't want to give the impression that we didn't welcome that.
No, well said. Andrew?
So I think it would be useful just to understand what this means for a typical trust, a typical DGH or a mental health trust, and what boards the challenge boards will be facing, and alongside that, what's our offer to help bridge the gap, because there will be potentially a gap here around improved productivity, because I think we've got an obligation as NHS England to promulgate best practice, and I think there's a lot that we can do, and we should be on it and supporting organisations to improve.
I agree. So Amanda, do you want to have the last comment on that?
Only that was just a really helpful discussion, thank you. But I just wanted to say very quickly, I think it's really important that we just remember that we are in no way different to the rest of the public sector.
Yes.
And actually, every part of the public sector is having to have the same conversations about how do they make sure that taxpayers' money is best spent.
Yeah.
So I really agree with Mary strongly that I think we should take confidence from what we've done over the last 2 years. And when I say we, of course, what I really mean is all of those people working in the NHS. Because actually what our colleagues have done is they have delivered 1.8% increase in productivity this year. And that's on the back of, similar improvement last year, and we have improved performance, and we have taken some really important steps on reform. So as we look to the future, I do think that the challenge for us is to remain appropriately ambitious for our patients, and appropriately ambitious to keep going with some of those critical steps on the reform journey. And that's what, as Julian says, we're just working through that now nationally, but it is the importance of then the planning process with our local systems as we make sure that that we have absolutely landed that in a way that is really owned by local systems, local organisations with the appropriate level of ambition for our patients, for our taxpayers, but also just recognising that that is going to be continued real focus on driving productivity, on driving out waste, on making sure that all of our systems and processes are working as effectively as they possibly can.
Thank you. Okay, I now need to move us on to try and get us back on. Yes, thank you. I know you've got to run, but thank you all. So let's move on to productivity, Julian, I think, which is quite good. It's a good segue into productivity. Is May joining?
No, May is otherwise being productive.
Okay, over to you.
Yeah.
All right.
I will.
You'll fly solo then.
Yeah, I'll fly solo. So look, thanks for the time. We brought a paper to this board back in May where we outlined what we understood the position to be in the NHS. And I will just briefly remind folk that productivity fell in the year 2021 as we went through, that first really sort of emergency phase of COVID where we had to stop a lot of work in order to deal with the pressure that the pandemic brought, but rebounded rapidly in 21-22.
Yeah.
Not back to the levels, we did not get back to the kind of pre-pandemic levels, but across the whole of the NHS, rebounded reasonably rapidly. And I will say, we've got about, across the whole of the NHS, we have about 19% more staff. And we are today seeing about 14% more patients than we were in 1920. When you look across all of the services the NHS provides. Now that says we're still not back where we were, i.e. as we discussed at the board in May, we are still experiencing some of the ongoing impacts of COVID. Clearly last year, the massive disruption from industrial action. And in the end, there will continue to be an absolute link between what we can do in the NHS and actually, what our partners in the local authorities and social care providers are able to do. And as we discussed, to the degree there are capacity constraints within social care, our productivity will be impacted because we will have patients longer in hospital. And that's still, I think we can see in the data having an effect. Nonetheless, we've been recovering about 2% a year in the acute sector, and as we said in the earlier paper, that continues to be true year to date in the acute sector here. So we see ongoing steady recovery, and we are doing a lot more work this year than we were this time last year, and that's been confirmed by the analysis by people like the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who published a paper about a month ago, actually, saying that they are seeing, welcoming the sort of ongoing productivity recovery that we are seeing in the acute sector. We are also seeing reductions in average length of stay for non-elective admissions. That's about 2.3% better than last year. Now, we're not just focused on the acute hospitals. I mean, one of the sort of weaknesses, I think, in the way that productivity has been understood and measured in the NHS over the years is that we have not really had a good focus on our community services and on mental health services. And we have done a lot of work over the recent years to improve our understanding of the costs and improve our understanding of the data. And we have started to produce, it's very much sort of a work in progress, sort of headline productivity metrics for those sectors that are, that we are working on with the leadership in those sectors, and indeed discussing with the ONS to make sure that they can properly incorporate it into some of the official statistics that they produce. And again, those show that there is room for improvement in an absolute terms, and indeed in terms of reducing variation. So it's just making sure right across the NHS we have a focus on delivering the best for taxpayers and the best for patients. Now, looking ahead to next year, as I just said, we are really going to be dependent on not more money, but improving, what we can do with the resources that we have. Now, the key things we are doing, as I said, we are looking to scale up like the sort of national improvement programme that we started under NHS Impact. Yeah. And I distinguish that from, I'm going to say it, performance performance management in the kind of most challenged trust, which still requires improvement. But how do we give the skills to our clinical and operational managers across our providers? And we are really focused on, again, improving the flow through emergency care, which means both how we reduce avoidable admissions as well as, optimising the amount of time people are in care and improving length of stay. And if we are going to achieve some of the goals we've set for next year, we need to sort of double or more the sort of improvement in length of stay next year. We are looking again, at how we continue to use the assets we've got, so improved theatre utilisation, and again, a real focus on outpatient services. I mean, just to give sort of a rough statistic, if we could get, we now measure and are giving to providers a statistic on, effectively how many outpatients are being seen per relevant clinician. And if we could get the bottom third up to the level of this, not the kind of the average, but actually just the next third, that could generate 2 to 3 million extra outpatients being seen. And that's about improving do not attend rates, as well as looking at just how well, the sort of booking and administration arrangements are working, and honestly, how we can use technology, things like ambient voice and various other things, to sort of improve actually the ability for clinicians to do the thing they want to do, which is see and manage people effectively. So we really do think there are gains to be made. We're doing work with some trusts at the moment to see, just how we can make sure we are doing job planning as effectively as we can, and can that make the difference? Both boards understanding, have job plans been done? How effective are they? And as importantly, are they being fulfilled? And I think that is, it's not a criticism. It's just making sure really good management disciplines are in place. And again, we're giving the clinicians the chance to do the thing they actually want to do. And then clearly I mentioned it before, how we keep improving staff retention, because if we can keep improving staff retention, we can keep reducing our temporary staffing costs. And then next year, just continuing the focus on technology, that we do the next major step in completing this phase of the Frontline Digitisation Programme, which is giving every major provider, making sure they have a modern electronic patient record system, that we continue to link up the NHS app to the patient portals that now most trusts have. Our aim would be, we can make sure we've secured the funding, can we get to 80% of trusts basically having 80% of their elective, or that sort of 70 to 80% of their elective pathways. Patients basically being linked up through the app with sort of automated communication. We know that if we can make the app work and if people use it, even in primary care, we think we can free up, 2 million hours of staff time and about 900,000 hours of GP time. That is just a massive gain. So those are the things we're focused on. Recently, there was published some work that actually Vin's team have been doing with some clinicians at Great Ormond Street, who have actually been running a large-scale trial of the use of ambient voice technology across actually all of our services, primary care, ambulance trusts, the acute sector. And I think that has given us a real insight into where that has the potential to make the biggest difference most quickly. So again, we will work to see, what we can do to scale and roll that out. And then finally, we are doing a real focus on clearly non-pay spend as well. Next year in medicines, the focus has, we'll focus on how we just make the best use of switching to biosimilars. We think over the next 4 or 5 years that we'll have hundreds of millions of pounds of potential savings. And on the non-pay side, with Jackie's team, making the best use of the national frameworks that exist, where we can get, basically best price at volume, where with supply chain we will agree with you their business plan for next year.
Very good. I'm going to let's open it up just for 2 or 3 questions on that. So who would like to say? Jeremy? There we go. Floods of hands. Excellent. 2 or 3. Anyway, so we're going to go Jeremy, then Mike, and Vin.
Just 2 quick points. So, in a strange way, the inconsistency gives a level of optimism because it says there must be opportunities as well. And I just wonder, off the back of this great work, how much we can use this to feed into the planning for next year and the conversations we're having with Trust to give them some options and actions and some information so that they can, particularly those who are struggling to make it balance, to hit their numbers. And then, at risk of repeating myself in the previous conversation, it feels to me productivity is one of the ways we can try and get ahead of what is going to be an incredibly tight funding situation over the next 5 to 10 years. And again, the point on the 10-year plan, taking all those fantastic opportunities, Julian, I think feeding those into 10-year plans so that we've got the funds identified that we can capture to make the investments we need to unlock that. I think feels to me needs to be intrinsically part of that overall 10-year planning process.
So, Mike?
I think I'm just going to repeat what Jeremy just said. I mean, what comes through is now a palpable sense of leadership in terms of the things that need to be done, which is a testament to you and your team. And a lot of the data now exists to start making the comparisons that Jeremy is describing, where we know that there's quite significant differences, variations in performance. And again, it feels like there's some low-hanging fruit to get after. And a lot of good things have been done around dealing with agency, retention rates and all the other things that you've alluded to. The concern, if I have one, is, well, I have lots, but the challenge of how we carve out the right level of strategic investment to be able to do the things that we know we need to do. And if there's one consensus I think that everybody agrees with, it's that the system is underinvested, and that has an impact on productivity, whether it's technology or whether it's infrastructure, whether it's construction, buildings, whatever. So a reflection on that, and it kind of builds to Jeremy's point, which is you will only solve this in a way which is sustainable by continuous investment over many cycles, not just over a year.
So, Vin, you had a question, I think?
Yeah, it's not a question, it's just a statement, Chair. So firstly, I think the NHS app's been tremendously exciting. There are bits of it that don't sound exciting, but actually quite simple things like receiving reminders through the NHS app. You've got an appointment, increases the chance you'll attend. But also into some of the organisations have started to adopt new features in the app, like the ability to send questionnaires to patients pre and post appointment. So when I was a full-time consultant, I did a headache clinic. Prior to that, you had to wait to come and see me before I could see you and then assess your symptoms. If questionnaires gradually start getting adopted across England, which we would hope to do in the next year, actually you can start collecting data and information for patients in advance and make one appointment really worth something instead of two for follow-up. So we'd hope next year very much to be able to work with clinicians, for example, through getting it right first time, to start standardising some of those practices and really adopting the app's features to their maximum impact. The second bit is that, last time we had the board in Blackpool, we did talk a bit about the federated data platforms. I won't go over it again, but fundamentally it is about putting data in the hands of clinicians and operations managers and allowing them to organise their work in a way that optimises care. And we can see that not just in the products that are also there, but also our teams are working directly with clinicians to develop new products, so you could get almost real-time information on where you can optimise scheduling of patients into clinics and theatres. And then the final bit I just want to mention is we shouldn't forget about surgical hubs. We're a big programme, and independent evaluation by the Health Foundation showed they are 20% more productive than caring for patients in big, busy acute hospitals where there's always competition for acute space. And pushing ahead with that programme, hopefully, will be in a really important part of the work that we're doing to make sure patients get treated.
I'm going to just pause it because we're going to be under time pressure. Julian, do you want to react to those are statements, really, or comments by Vin, but to Jeremy or Mike's comments? Using information into the trust.
We are working currently, it's one of the reasons why May is being productive elsewhere, on actually taking the data we have trust by trust, which at the moment is quite acute focus, though we are just looking at what can we do on the community mental health side too, even with the data that we have, to actually tell people what we think the opportunities there are, commercially by point of, sort of delivery. Again, I think we need to have a real focus next year on getting all boards to look at their establishment and the establishment growth they've had over the last 4 or 5 years, in particular in their support and admin sides. I mean, that has grown actually in percentage terms faster than other areas. And I think we just have to ask people, is it all necessary? And I think it's just, we just need people to sort of go through that stuff. But we're going to try in early in the new year that we can give organisation by organisation at least our view of the data we have on them and where we think the opportunities are and where we think it's worth boards at least asking, the serious question. And Mike, I completely agree with you. This is not just a one-year thing. It is how do we set the programme up that, over a long period of time, we are learning from what's worked and, as well as laying the foundations now. I mean, I think one of the issues I still think we need to get to grips with the government and the Exchequer, but I think this is true across government, is in particular for technology investment, the balance between capital and revenue and some understanding recognition that there's a significant chunk which is revenue investment, but it is investment. It isn't just the cost of running things; it is investment. So no doubt those conversations will continue because I do worry otherwise, we will not be able to make the changes at the pace that we need to make them to make the NHS sustainable for patients and taxpayers and our staff.
Julian, thank you. I am going to move us on. I realise there'll be more appetite for questions, but we've had a conversation on productivity before. It will come back to the board. It's a really important theme. But I do want to move us on to the next item, which I think, Julian, you might introduce or just hand to Adam. And Adam Memon, welcome to the board. I was delighted you joined. I can't remember when you joined us now, a few months ago, and we got you from Treasury. And I'm always delighted you did come. And actually the work you're leading on in this space is really important and incisive. So thank you. And I don't know if Julian's going to introduce it, he's going to hand it straight to you. But as we do, obviously assume the paper's been read. So it's just the key points for the board to engage upon, I think.
I'll just say one thing, which is, as Adam's going to explain, we have a lot of evidence and increasing evidence about actually the link where the NHS can make a difference to economic inactivity in particular, and better labour market outcomes for the working age population. I mean, as well as clearly with children, had we set them up well for the future, but where investment in health services can drive a bigger economy, a better fiscal position, and therefore a better outcome for all concerned. And I think the work he is doing is critical to us helping the government do better for society as a whole.
Yeah. Adam?
Thanks, Julian. So the board may remember over the summer some new analysis that Amanda and Julian asked us to do. That analytical work continues. We are doing much more now to show the relationship between a variety of health interventions on economic outcomes. We're doing more to understand kind of the various clusters of conditions that are driving economic inactivity. Kind of one big update is the OBR's forecast at the budget, which showed that health and disability related benefits in 23-24 going from 64.7 billion to 100 billion pounds by the end of the forecast period, and sort of 80 billion pounds in 25-26 compared to an overall DHC budget of 200 billion pounds. So it's a pretty enormous proportion of the total health budget. So there's a really big, significant fiscal opportunity for us to do more to keep people healthy, prevent them from getting conditions which make them sort of sick enough to drop out of the labour market. So Amanda and Julian basically asked us, well, what do we think deeply and creatively about what do we do with this analysis? How do we use this work to drive the 3 shifts in 10-year plans? As you'll see in the paper, we've worked with Steve House's team, Navina, Vin, Claire Murdoch and others to establish these health and growth accelerators. But they're co-designed with systems, so it's very much in this sort of new approach that we're developing to a really sort of mature, grown-up approach with a variety of ICBs. So we at the budget and then the sort of white paper launched last week, we announced, or the government announced, 3 health and growth accelerators. The first 3 will be in South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, and North East North Cumbria. They'll be focused on the top health conditions driving economic inactivity, which of course is mental health, MSK, but also diabetes, hypertension, CVD as well. We've got NHR who are evaluating them, but critically we're going to look at both the health outcomes and the economic outcomes, because the economic outcomes can come quite quickly, but a lot of the time the economic outcomes will take longer to appear. But if we're going to do this really well, productivity is going to be central to them. We're going to use behavioural science, population health management, use our data much more effectively to focus on basically to build a much more personalised prevention system. How do you focus the right interventions at the right people at the right time? But it gives us an opportunity to bring together prevention, neighbourhood health, health inequalities, really improve operational performance over time as well, and it's a big opportunity for us to improve economic growth as well.
So let's open up for questions. So Duncan, Steve, Robert. So let's get that all, and then I'll come down this side. Yeah.
This is great to see. And just to pick up a point Judy and me mentioned about children, and there's the element about how do we support children to stay in education, because that then has a knock-on effect into employment. And I'm just wondering, through the 3 growth accelerators, is there a view about or some work in looking at how the NHS supports people and children to stay in education, and therefore the economic impact that has then on their ability to work?
Yeah, again, Steve Parris, National Medical Director, again, incredibly supportive of the work. As you say, you've been working with people in my directorate on particularly cardiovascular interventions. But you've got in the paper a number of conditions and a number of existing interventions, diabetes prevention programme, talking therapies you mentioned. But I just wondered if you give a broader, maybe a more granular sense of the balance between how much this is going to be testing and evaluating existing interventions, as you've just said, testing how we can focus those interventions a bit better and the economic impact of that, versus developing and testing potentially new interventions.
And we'll do the normal trick, Adam. It's a hard luck about batching up questions. So, Robert?
Yeah, so I think this is a really terrific programme. If I understand you correctly, you're going to zone in on the people who are off work and sick and attempt to get them back into work, which of course is totally laudable. The ideal, of course, would be to prevent them getting sick in the first place. So this was sort of natural NHS territory because it's dealing with people who are sick or secondary prevention. The real gain would be primary prevention and getting sick in the first place, which ICSs should have as part of their remit. Because I'm just curious to know the balance between those two emphases in your programme.
So we'll come back down the other side for questions, but do you want to take those 3 first?
Yes, on Duncan, on children and education, there's the sort of interaction, especially when it comes to mental ill health, between educational attainment, health outcomes and economic outcomes is very, very strong. So there's a real focus on, I think, in these accelerators on young people's mental health. It comes within the broader context of other interventions in the white paper. These are youth trailblazers, which are focused on government's manifest equipment there. We won't in these accelerators focus at the very start of life, because we're trying to see an economic effect sort of within over the course of the department. But there's definitely kind of more work that we're doing there, and definitely sort of keen to keep talking about how we take that forward. Steve, on your point on the existing versus new interventions. So the way we're evaluating it is, firstly, does the overall approach work? And that's something that we test quite quickly. So NHR and ONS are the 2 partners in this. So there's never going to be a perfectly optimised policy package, because the problems are dynamic. But we want to test, does this systems-based approach with these sorts of interventions make a difference in health and economic outcomes? And that will be kind of largely things that we are already doing, where we have good confidence that these are going to have a big health interventions, and then to test what economic interventions would be. Where there is novelty, I think, is the way in which we join up those services initially. So how do you bring together your mental health and your MSK services? But also, we know from data, Dutch data, and we're testing it hypothesis here that depression, diabetes, and depression and COPD, for example, are two big clusters that are particularly sharply increasing in probability of exit. So how do we tackle that multimorbidity challenge as well? Robert, on your point, actually, so the accelerator is really focused on those who are on the edges of the labour market, so those who are already in the labour market, as well as those who've only really recently left the labour market, so to try to prevent them from getting so unwell that they end up leaving the labour market. It's probably quite a different set of interventions you would need for people who are who've been out of work for a long time.
Thank you, Alan. So there could be 3 more questions coming down this side. One for me, which I don't mind looking stupid. Can you explain to me the correlation with the waiting list and these statistics? So how many of these statistics are actually on the waiting list as an order of magnitude? Because I don't think I know that answer, but I don't think it's as many as is sometimes assumed just in external commentary. It would be very helpful to know that. And then, Jeremy, you were going to
I was going to ask a similar question. So when we did the 10-year workforce planning, we did a lot of demand planning and what kind of staff we'd need and which areas we'd need that expertise. It strikes me it's great looking out and looking at what this might do for the economy, but it feels to me there's a parallel piece which is looking in. Where are we spending the 180 billion? And if we were able to address these issues, it's not productivity, but it is in a sense. How could we have a go at the 180 billion to save money? What that might mean for our hospital programme? What might it mean for our workforce programme? And to some extent, where would you prioritise to try and manage the cost internally into the NHS as well? So you may have done some of that work, but it wasn't so obvious in the discussion. So I think looking out is great, but also looking back in as part of the 10-year programme seems to be a way of managing supply and demand in what is a challenging situation.
And then Vin, I think.
Yeah, I did. Firstly, Adam, thank you for your leadership on this. I genuinely think this is one of the most exciting and galvanising things that we're doing in the NHS at the moment. And I was up in North East and North Cumbria, and there is genuine excitement there, not just in the NHS, but actually in local government and in the voluntary sector as well. So that's fantastic. So when I kind of look back, I'm a paediatrician, so when I look back on my career, the kind of policy areas littered with things like this, where they're evaluated too soon and then they're abandoned. And actually, when you look back 10 years later, you think maybe we abandoned that a bit too soon. So I just wondered, what's a kind of reasonable set of expectations? Because some of these complex sort of physical and social support programmes, they do need time to bed in. And I just wonder how we set our expectations so that they're reasonable and make sure we keep backing this and don't kind of evaluate too soon.
So,
yes.
Those are the last questions on this.
Chairman, on the waiting list, there's a very real impact of long waiting on economic inactivity. So that is established by the OBR last year, and they published work in the report in summer 23, which had an estimate for those who are inactive because of sort of long waiting times. There is definitely some debate over the relative impact of waiting times on
the number of people on the waiting list.
Yes.
And are they actually
and how
inactive
much
because of that?
Yes. So we are now doing more work with the ONS to match our waiting list data with labour force data to get a really much richer understanding of that as well. So we'll have new findings on that. Jeremy, on the impact of demand, I think it's really important and very much on my mind as well, the other side of my role. And in particular, if we're thinking over a 5-year time horizon, there are some things that you could do now or in the next sort of year or two, especially in North Cumbria, some of the work they're doing on sort of people who identify people who are on waiting lists. What can you do to prevent them getting worse so that they don't need more, they don't crash into services in future years? So that impact demand, we're sort of thinking about how would we assess the impact on core performance over time as well. So that's definitely
again. It comes back to investments that you might want to invest there rather than have that investment grow and multiple at 5 times and have a much more expensive intervention 5 years down the line.
Yeah, definitely. And then on your point on evaluating too soon, it's really important. And we can think of many programs like this. But what we've done is we've built that into how we're evaluating. So we're trying to show it in 25-26 as close to real time, kind of based upon the sort of the NIHR sort of evaluation of what's is the program as a whole working using kind of a series of process metrics, but we've also asked them to do a 3 to 5 year follow-up, so we can test in 5 years. We'll know over 3 to 5 year time how has it worked. So we've built multiple time horizons into it. I think the key thing, one really interesting thing that's come out is that from some of the early work on things like bariatric surgery, which is published, or talking therapies and elsewhere, is that the effects don't just disappear after 1 year, they really do endure after some time. So that thus the health and economic impact is much more long-standing. It's often not internalised. So it's that's an important part for us.
Adam, thank you. Very good discussion, good paper. I mean, it's a really important piece of work, actually. So thank you. Now we've got 2 more items to go. I know we've been going since 9 o'clock this morning, but 2 more items to go. So let's move on to the quality strategy, and I think Steve and Duncan, you're going to lead in.
Yeah, so thank you. I think this is, again, still Vin's words about galvanising and exciting. I think this is another galvanising and exciting piece of work, actually, as we develop the quality strategy for the NHS and reflecting quality as the organising principle for the work. It's our intention to do this alongside and parallel with the 10-year plan, and also the work that Penny Dash is doing. And just to remind the board, at the moment Penny is looking at 6 organisations and how they're working together, particularly focused around quality and safety. So Health Watch, the HSSIB, CQC, etc. And so really making sure that this work aligns with any findings out of that, I think is going to be really important. You'll see in the paper we've set out our intention to use the Darcy definition of quality, so safe, effective, and making sure there's a positive experience. And I think reflection in some of the discussions we've had today about how do we make sure we give them equal weighting in our approach, and ensure that we focus on all of those areas, and also that there is a current throughout this around inequalities, and making sure inequalities is a strong theme in the work that we do. We've also, and picking up on the conversation we've just had, making sure value and productivity, and recognising that is part of quality, and making sure that the effective use of every penny is important to quality. And also access, which we've obviously touched on, access today as well. So we've set out in the paper how we'll develop the strategy in some core areas. Particularly, we've reflected, or we will reflect on some of the areas that have built up over the years in terms of recognition and reward for quality. So using this as an opportunity to review areas such as sequins or the quality counts, how we're using them really to drive improvement, and making sure that they are effective still in our approach, and getting the balance between quality improvement, planning, controls and assurance. We will work with the National Quality Board on the development of this piece of work, and also the Quality Committee. I'm sure Robert will come in at some point about this, but we've got this as a standing item on the board Quality Committee as well, to make sure the board has sight and tracking of progress and ongoing involvement. But perhaps I'll hand over to Steve if there's anything he wants to add to that,
Probably
Steve.
nothing more to add. Very happy to take questions and discussion.
I'm going to throw it to you, Robert, first to comment, if you'd like to comment, and then you may have other questions later on as we loop round. But as you chair the Quality Committee first.
Sure. No, I mean, I think this is terrific work, and I think the product will be really important. I guess I'd particularly emphasise the effectiveness point. I think there's great work going on about clinical effectiveness in NHSE, and getting better outcome measures and focusing on inequality, population health and primary care. All that will come out. So I think very supportive.
Actually, just two points I would add, and Duncan's hinted at this. So clearly there are a number of building blocks already.
Yeah.
We have a patient safety strategy that is now a number of years old. It is developed and maybe a bit of a refresh as part of this. We are undertaking a strategic piece of work, a strategic review of our clinical audits and registries programme. So again, that is another key component, particularly on clinical effectiveness. So we're not seeking to duplicate those bits of work. There will be a fair amount of integration of existing or ongoing bits of work, but there are some areas, and patient experience I think is one of those, where we feel that we do need to do some more work.
Okay, so I know Emily had a question. Andrew, I think, has a question. So, Emily?
So two things. The first is it is in the annex, but I just wanted to mention that the 10-year plan work stream that I'm leading, one of the vision work streams, has as its mission statement, I have access to high quality and effective care when and where I need it. So we've been working really closely with the team to make sure all of the stuff you're doing here is going to be reflected, as well as obviously hearing all of the inputs from systems and condition groups. Second thing I wanted to pick up was on the table where we talk about measuring publishing and publishing quality, which Duncan, you and I and Aidan and others have spoken about. I'm not saying anything new, but this is really critical for me, because the work we've done to try and get, sometimes sponsored by me, but done by lots of people across the organisation, particularly Vin's teams, to make sure we've got actual, not just lots of data, but insight into the data. Yeah. And I think we really struggle with quality to know how do we look at this in a way with the financial and the operational data, as Jan was talking about earlier, to really, as you said earlier, Duncan, spot the places where it's a worry before it's a big problem. And obviously building that into the work that Jan and I spoke about earlier is really important. So I'm really keen to make sure we're an active part of the answer on that.
Andrew?
So just taking a kind of productivity lens on this, I think it may be worth just refreshing where we are with clinical pathways. So if you look at the top 10 diagnoses in general medicine for a typical DGH, we haven't got a standardised approach. And I think there's lots of potential there to develop that. So it'd be good if we could put some focus on that, because we're trying to create a better flow through our system, and I think trying to get a standardised approach is a way forward. It may meet with lots of resistance from clinicians, but heart attack, stroke, we've done some good work on that front, but we've got the whole panoply of stuff that every A&E sees that I think warrants a fresh look at it.
Vin?
Yeah, it's just to make a point really. So first, I think the thing that the comments that Emily's just made about data, that Adam's made about data, and that we've made throughout this meeting show the real importance of linking up data sets across the NHS. So a few weeks ago, a report commissioned by Chris Whitty, Chief Medical Officer, the Chief Statistician Ian Diamond, and by Tim Ferris, my predecessor, reported on the importance of this and called for a national strategy on data linkage. And that will be something that we'll work up in the 10-year plan group that I'm chairing, because that is such a critical part of our future. If we take Andrew's example of pathways, patients don't just come in and out of acute hospitals. Patients get looked after in primary, secondary care, increasingly in social care as well. And so I know that's something that this board supports, and something we're very hopeful that our proposals will be considered by government.
Duncan or Steve, you'll have a go at responding to those questions or points. I mean, some of the statements of support really as much questions. Do you want to react to any of those?
Well, to Andrew's point, I think I agree. We do have, again, components of that. So we have the National Optimal Stroke Imaging Pathway, NOSIP, in the stroke pathways, which is one bit of the stroke pathway, but nevertheless it's a nationally agreed pathway, and diagnostics imaging is such a core component of getting individuals with suspected stroke diagnosed and then to the right place for the right treatment. So I'm sure that's something we can take away and build on. And again, it does link into the productivity discussion, because I think I didn't say it at the time, but productivity is often thought of. Often I hear comments that clinicians don't like the word productivity, but I think when you get them working on best clinical practice, then I think that's where productivity actually comes alive.
So if I was to give one reflection, which is probably, and you can just shoot it down, it was, it's partly what Penny Dash is currently looking at. And partly responds to what Emily said about the amount of data we have, and actually data's fine, but insights are better, I think. So I had this phrase for a while about what we tend to see when we have safety issues and we have investigation. We have this longitudinal approach, don't we, to safety regulation. And safety is clearly one of the three components of the DARSI definition of quality with which we agree. So actually we've got this world where we've just added, each time there's a review, in comes someone very able, but they add a whole load new more requirements, definitions, regulations, and I take that as a probably rather glib opinion, but actually would say as you look at this, it's a very big, complex space. And do you, in the private sector, you sunset a lot. You would actually take out a lot of activity that actually in the end is noise rather than insightful. And the question here, I think, when you look at the definitions that we're going to apply and the data we use, and I don't just mean the safety, it can be in the effective treatment, the effectiveness of the interventions. Are we rigorous enough about continuously decluttering so actually we can still manage most effectively the data that we're seeing about how we assess quality? Because actually, you know, the number of different safety regulators or recommendations we have, just what you had to reduce in maternity, the MSSP, or, you know, that's a real attempt to put an umbrella set of requirements over multiple investigations necessarily carried out, but trying to bring some sort of, I call it coherence. And we do know, don't we, that when we have incidents, which is why I think Penny is doing this review, partly why she's doing this review, one of the pleas we get from the executives in managerial or in clinical position actually is if something goes wrong, I've suddenly got 30 different people asking me for 160 different pieces of information. And so there's something for me about when we look at this, let's not be longitudinal as well. Let's actually do something about sunsetting or simplification so we get at the information that really matters most, that goes to the definition of quality. But I don't know if that's...
Well, yes, I think the data issue is really complex for a whole host of reasons, and we actually measure a lot of data.
Yeah.
You could argue too much, so the core question is which is the core data, and we debate this in the quality committee. We have done for years. It's the on effectiveness, for instance, what we're really interested in is outcome data. So in cancer, it's cancer survival data. Yeah. That clearly has a lag on it. You're always looking in the rear mirror, but you can have metrics, and the faster diagnosis standard and early detection rates are one example of where you might be looking at some more processy indicators that are lead indicators, and you could go through that for just about everything. Of course, others have interest in this area, particularly when it comes to early warning signs, where things might be going off. The CQC have done this in the past around their monitoring systems, but it is complex, and I wouldn't want to give the impression that it's an easy thing to do. But it is one of the things that we should look at, and certainly sunsetting. So, for instance, the quality accounts, are we asking the right things in the quality accounts? Some of that is within statute, but I think, as Duncan said, we should take the opportunity to look at all of these things.
Very good. Okay, are we... Mary?
Sorry, I just wanted to say, I noticed we were asked to comment as well. My comment is I think this will work really well because it's in such clear English, but I didn't really understand how long we're going to take to develop the strategy. And my other point is that somewhere I think you've talked about quite a lot of things in it, but continuity of care is so central, and I just would like that to come out perhaps a bit more strongly in what we've finally developed.
I mean, completely agree. You champion that. Remind us all the time of the continuity of care, and I think it's really important. So,
well, firstly on the continuity of care, absolutely. I think that's fundamental part of this. And actually, if you look at, and we need to lift the experience element, I think that would talk to that as well. In terms of the timeline, obviously we are working parallel with the 10-year plan and then some of the timelines around that as well. So there will be a significant amount of work done in the early part of next year to progress this, and then obviously the alignment with the work that we're also doing on with Dash, and then obviously the operating framework as well.
Yes, and I think there's always a temptation with quality, because it covers everything, to try and put everything in. So I think one of the things we will need to be is quite rigorous and try and make sure it's a focused strategy. The second thing I was just going to mention, because it's in the paper, was we will do this with the National Quality Board. It's worth saying something about the National Quality Board. The NQB has existed since pre-NHS England time. It originated in the Department of Health, and it is still, in essence, sponsored by the Department of Health. It now broadly acts as a forum to bring together arm's-length bodies and regulators, mostly clinical leaders, but not exclusively, to discuss issues around quality, to bring quality issues that they're dealing with in their own organisation for information and comment. And it does occasionally, from time to time, publish guidance. It published some guidance yesterday on risk management in integrated care boards, for example. It is not hugely resourced, and it doesn't have a huge amount of authority within the system, but it is a useful board. I know it is one of the things that Penny will be looking at in her review, and she came to the National Quality Board just a couple of weeks ago at its last meeting. So whether we see any evolution of the NQB, we will have to wait and see, but it is important, I think, that we do the work with NQB.
Okay. Amanda, do you want to make a comment?
Actually, I was going to say exactly what Steve has just said, because I just thought it was really important to pull out the fact that this is not a unilateral NHS England piece of work. This is very much and again, thank you to Stephen Duncan and others for the leadership on this, but it's really important that it does go through the NQB so that it does reflect the combined views of all of the really important partners that work in this space. So I think that you brought that to life, Steve, but it is a really important forum, because actually the authority of the individual organisations represented there is immense. And if we're talking about something that is going to bind together the whole of the landscape around quality, then we can't do that without the NQB's explicit involvement and endorsement. Exactly the same point goes for the 10-year plan, and the importance of making sure it's just knitted through that. And again, you've rightly referenced the importance of alignment with Penny Dash's work, and I think it's a really timely thing, given that those two things are happening, Penny's work and the 10-year plan, for you to be leading this so that it's there as a proactive input. Thank you.
Okay, let's go. Thank you, Duncan. Thanks, Steve. And thank you, Robert, for chairing the Quality Committee. John, should we go to the last substantive?
Yes, and thank you for Robert's leadership. We should say that, because I think that has really injected some pace and some energy into our internal governance, which again has been hugely important. Very important.
So, John, it's really important, commissioning integration as a topic, delegation of specialised commissioning to ICBs.
Great, thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, John Stewart, National Director for Specialised Commissioning. So, the purpose of the paper really is to seek board approval to proceed with the delegation of commissioning responsibility for 70 specialised services to all ICBs across the country from April 25. And I think it's probably worth saying right from the outset that there are around 100 services within the portfolio, including all highly specialised services that are not considered suitable for delegation and will be retained by NHS England and directly commissioned by NHS England going forward. Just as a reminder, the board has considered this commissioning reform agenda on 2 occasions, actually, in the last 12 months. So last December, the board approved the full delegation of commissioning responsibility at that point for 59 services to all ICBs across the Midlands, East of England and the North West regions from April of this year. ICBs in all those other remaining regions continued with statutory joint commissioning responsibilities with NHS England in preparation for full delegation from April 25, so this coming April. And then again in March, the board considered this topic and approved a final list of services for delegation, and that slightly grew from the 59 that have been delegated this year to a final list of 70 services. So I think we're clear now on which services are being delegated and which services are going to be retained by NHS England. I think since then it's probably just worth highlighting a number of developments that I think further kind of reinforce the importance of these changes. And the first of those, I think, is the new government setting a clear reform agenda focused on achieving three big shifts. The shift from sickness to prevention, hospital to community, and of course shift from analogue to digital. And of course a key driver of delegating specialised services has always been about enabling this left shift through really aligning incentives to deliver more upstream interventions. Secondly, we then had the publication of Lord Darcy's investigation of the NHS, and I think his report really just again underscores the importance of delivering that left shift. And I highlighted it in the paper, but Lord Darcy does note how specialised services are accounting for a growing proportion of the overall NHS budget, and we absolutely understand why that is the case, and it is largely driven by our ability to provide new treatments for conditions and other diseases that we previously couldn't treat, and that is very welcome. But it's also, he describes, creating a kind of inexorable pressure on costs, hence again the need to focus on prevention, upstream interventions going forward. I think it's also worth just reflecting on the previous discussion we had as well, and Lord Darcy's investigation kind of emphasising the importance of making sure that we have that clear framework for quality as we develop all of these reform proposals. And I think that's precisely why delegation is actually taking place in the context of an ongoing framework of nationally set standards, service specifications and clinical access policies. So even for those services that we delegate, NHS England remains the accountable commissioner, and so we will continue to provide kind of that clarity around what good high quality care looks like that Lord Darcy called for. Similarly, we will continue to support the development of nationally defined metrics, quality dashboards to support improvement, oversight and assurance. We will provide ongoing national clinical leadership across the entire portfolio through our clinical reference group infrastructure. And finally, I think we within NHS England will continue to have a really important role in this space in supporting kind of the latest innovations, working with NICE, with partners through organisations like the Accelerated Access Collaborative and others to really drive kind of innovation across the whole portfolio. In terms of delegation this year, I think it would be fair to say that in those regions that we've delegated responsibility, it has gone very smoothly, including all the kind of complex technical aspects, like making sure that cash is flowing in the right way. Really important. But I think you'll see in the paper at paragraph 10 that we've also highlighted just some of the early areas of focus and improvement that those ICBs and those regions are really coming together to really target and try and drive improvement. Those ICBs in the remaining 4 regions who are yet to go with full delegation have obviously been working very closely together and with our regional teams to make sure that they are ready to take on full delegated responsibility. We held a national moderation panel back in October to review those plans, which we were assured were in kind of a good state to proceed with these plans to delegate the entire suitable portfolio from April. They were further considered by the NHS England Executive Group at the end of October, and I think the only kind of recommendation coming from that discussion was the importance of probably applying a consistent condition around delegation for those ICBs that are in segments 3 or 4 of the NHS oversight framework, and that requires regional NHS England approval before kind of any significant changes in kind of a specialised allocation are made. So In summary, we're looking for board support to proceed with delegation for those services to all ICBs from April, including giving delegated authority to regional directors to sign the actual delegation agreement and approve that condition that I just referred to around those ICBs in NOF segments 3 and 4.
So, comments or questions, Jeremy?
Just a conversation we had at ARAC yesterday. So I was just going to flag, Steve, the conversation we're having around a slightly philosophical or existential conversation around how do we in NHS England check this is going okay from a governance point of view, first, second, third line of defence, and how we get the link up or the assurance that it's working through without being overly bureaucratic. So I just flagged that conversation is going ahead so we get that in place before the next financial year.
Mary?
I actually think we might need to keep an eye on the fact that the cost of commissioning doesn't go up.
Andrew?
So these budgets historically have been overspent from memory.
Are you in charge of specialised commissioning?
I am, and there has been no overspend in the specialised budget for, I think, at least 9-10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, wow. All right. Well, that's surprising. But well done.
Was that your point? Have you been disemboweled by that?
Absolutely.
Good response, John. Sorry, Andrew.
So can I? Oh, sorry.
I was going to. I just want to reinforce, make 3 points. One is, I think it's really important. It's about devolution and delegation to the ICBs, where, and it's really, really important that they are given as much authority close to their patients as they can. And clearly then to Jeremy's point, it's important though that there is some tracking because particularly in a world of financial pressure, actually we just need to keep sight of the fact that this is it equitable decisioning or whatever one would call it.
There's the tracking performance, but also is it being governed properly? So there's a bit of debate, and probably the tracking performance probably sits here, and then the governance around it probably sits at ARAC, but both of those,
Yeah, because actually there is this phrase that which is the ICB becomes responsible, but NHS England remains accountable, which is interesting. So that governance and tracking is really important. I would then make one sort of odd point, which is I've rarely seen a contract like it. And so when, I've seen lots of contracts in my time, and I can't, in all honesty, and it's for the minutes if you like, I haven't read every word of it. But my goodness, is this really what we need as a contract to actually do specialised commissioning services? I mean, the lawyers have haven't gone mad, but they've been allowed to run wild. Have they not?
So, the delegation agreement has been developed in partnership with regional colleagues, ICB, so I think people are comfortable with it, and it was for the agreement that was used and maybe slightly updated when we delegated to those ICBs this year. I think it follows the same kind of delegation agreement that was used for and Steve will clarify this, but for primary care and other direct commissioning functions with some modifications. But I take your point; it's quite a long agreement.
We know the primary care contract is about 1,000 pages long. So
it's short.
So short. I don't know if I'm making a point. I don't think it's a useful point. It's just an observation. But I do wonder whether actually there's a better and simpler approach rather than every possible legal definition being thrown into a commissioning contract. Actually, but anyway.
I have a question, if I may. I just want to build on the question that Jeremy asked about governance and oversight, and it's from just a slightly different angle. So we know that a lot of the partners we work with who represent the interests of particular groups are anxious about the devolution of specialised commissioning, because at the moment some of them feel like they have a central person they can come and talk to, and if they're worried about services, the quality of services, access to services, provision of services. There's a way in to the NHS to have that conversation, and that once it's devolved out to 42 ICBs, that will be harder.
They can always read the contract.
Well, thank you, Richard. And I know you have made provision for that in your point here on point 17B, where you've talked about the fact that there are very clear policies and standards that will be expected to be followed. But I just wonder if I could ask you or invite you to say what you would say to give confidence to those organisations that we know are anxious on behalf of the patients that they represent, that this isn't going to lead to a lack of opportunity to influence or a lack of opportunity to see that consistent standards actually applied in practice.
Yeah, no, a really good point, and I think there are mixed views out there amongst both kind of clinicians and patient groups around, the benefits of delegation, and I think that is recognised. I think the most important thing to say, though, is this point about NHS England remaining the accountable commissioner. What we're not doing here is we are not delisting these services, so these services remain specialised. Yeah. In fact, it is actually the Secretary of State rather than NHS England who specifies which services are specialised, and so there are no change in the portfolio. But what it means, being the accountable commissioner, is we do have that ability to continue to set the national standards. It means that there will continue to be people sitting nationally where patient groups can come to and raise concerns or talk about opportunities for improving, very much as they do now on a kind of daily basis with my team. So I think that is really important, and I think the oversight and insurance bit is critical, and we are working with our regional colleagues and Emily's directorate to make sure that specialised services is not kind of looked at in a silo, but are fully integrated into the kind of overall oversight and assurance framework. And I think we've got a kind of good starting point for that because of the standards, metrics, dashboards that we already have. What we've tried to do within specialised services is almost mirror that kind of framework that Lord Darcy set out, and we don't intend to lose any aspect of that.
Very good. Any other comments or questions? Happy to support. Very good. Very happy to support. Thank you very much. So I think that brings us to the end of the... Well, no, it doesn't. We have one item, a starred item for information, which is a directions and mandatory requests summary of the National Major Trauma Registry, NMTR, for NHS Wales. Request 2024 issued to NHS England by the Digital Healthcare Wales in October 2024. It's for information, and the board simply to note the mandatory request issued to NHS England in October of this year. Noted? Very good. Thank you very much. So can I just then see if there's any other business? And it has been a long day, but that isn't to put you off. If there is any other business, just going around the table, just looking around the table, any other business? In which case, can I thank all of you actually for your diligence and commitment through what's been a very long but good day. I mean, I think the discussions we had in the morning, in addition to the topics we've covered this afternoon, has been a pretty rich day, actually, in terms of topics covered. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.